Hi, my name is Saoi O'Connor. I'm 16, I'm from Skibbereen, and I've been climate striking for 40 weeks. I'm an organiser with Fridays for Future Ireland, and I'm here today to have a chat with Minister Bruton about climate action and Ireland's vision for the future. So I guess, Minister, everyone is kind of talking now about the carbon tax that has just come out in the budget last week. What does taxing carbon for people, who are trying to heat their homes and get their kids to school mean in the context of importing liquid natural gas from America?
Carbon pricing is about asking people to recognise that activities that generate carbon is doing damage to the world. And we have set a trajectory which was advised by the Climate Advisory Committee that we should move from what it is now €20 a tonne to €80 a tonne. The impact of that is that it gives a very clear signal to people that they should not lock in to choices of vehicle, systems of heating their homes or other decisions they might make without considering the carbon impact. And I think this will be an encouragement for people to switch to other activities. But the other side of the coin is that this carbon price trajectory will raise 6,000 million, €6 billion, which we have committed that every single cent of that will be used to help to empower people to change their lives. Some that will be taking on climate action, some will be dealing with what's called just transition. Practical example of Bruton, where as we exit peace, huge impact on the Midlands, we have to cater for that. And the other element is fuel poverty, people who simply aren't equipped to make the change. We have to make sure that they're supported. So I think it is a really significant policy instrument. Indeed, John Fitzgerald, the chairman of the Climate Advisory Committee, said that it would be impossible to deliver climate action without carbon pricing.
Absolutely, okay, and I think a lot of that is really positive, and we're really looking at moving forward in Ireland from this fossil fuel infrastructure. But how, in the context of building the Shannon LNG, does it seem right to you to be encouraging people on the ground to move their lifestyles when we're building this new infrastructure to bring in fracked gas from America?
Well, I have said very clearly that I will not support any funding for the building of an LNG terminal until I've done a study of security and sustainability to evaluate whether, as some people claim, this would contribute to energy security during the transition, or on the other hand, as others claim, it would be doing significant damage to the carbon trajectory. So that I have made a decision to have that evaluated, and I would only support such a project in the event that after a scientific evaluation, if you like, it was shown to be part of a correct path of transition.
Okay, but we know that the existing science shows that building this terminal would not would have a negative impact on trying to reach our 2030 targets.
Well, the issue, I suppose, around the use of gas, and I know people have different opinions, but the Climate Advisory Council have advised that for us to move from 30% renewables now to 70%, which we have set as a target, and that represents 5 times as much renewables as we have today, that when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, we have to have a reserve. And as of today, we are advised that the best reserve to do that is gas. We have natural gas obviously in the Corrib, but it will run out very shortly. So we do have to consider other gas sources. One of those is the potential of an LNG terminal which could source gases. The main concern around the LNG terminal in Shannon is not the use of natural gas, it's the fear that this could be fracked gas, and that fracked gas has particular features in its production that may generate fugitive gases, methane in particular, and that may have an adverse impact. So that's why I'm doing this evaluation, to see does that stand up to scrutiny and what decisions should we make.
Absolutely. Okay. We mentioned the 2030 targets and obviously the Paris aspiration for 1.5 degrees, but what does 1.5 degrees as a target mean to you?
Well, what we have set is that we need to get to net zero by 2050, and that has been an EU aspiration. Not every EU country has yet joined up to that, but that plainly is the direction of travel of most European countries. 24 out of the 27 have advocated that. To do that, of course, we have to put a plan in place to make the changes. So the plan that I've put in place between now and 2030 involves 5 times as much renewables as we have today, 10 times as much retrofitting of old homes to make them climate resilient, 25 times the number of new electric vehicles going on our road compared to today, which is only 4%, we're moving to 100%, planting 250 million trees over the next decade, getting rid of all non-recyclable plastics, and so on. So we've set out a plan that is ambitious to do that, but of course you and I and many others will have to join in bringing people along this journey, because we've seen in Bord na Móna that's a big challenge to people. We've seen trying to get people to commit to electric vehicles. It's a challenge, even though there's government grants there. Getting people to make those changes in their home. They might prefer to put in a new kitchen rather than to improve the fabric of their home. We have to try and encourage people that this is the right thing to do, that it's right for them, but also it's right for their children and the generations coming afterwards. So that's a job of work to implement this plan.
Absolutely, and I think you touched on it there at the end, but I guess what I'm asking is, on a human level, what does 1.5 degrees mean? Why are we aiming for 1.5 degrees?
Well, 1.5 degrees has been established by the scientific community as a critical point which we have to stay below in order to prevent the damage accelerating. If you like, there's a tipping point. So we have to work and get every country in the world. That's the challenge of this. It's not good enough for Ireland to get its house in order, or Europe to get its house in order. We actually have to get everyone in order. So that's what it means, is that we have to create, through the Paris Agreement, an assembly of nations which embraces everyone, who starts to make this a reality. And I've been at the UN conferences, I've been at the EU councils, and there are still countries who are holdouts, who don't see that this is necessary, or that the impact on their society would be too great for them to commit to this. So we've to try and work to do that, and that's why a number of countries have committed to double the amount of money they're willing to put into supporting adaptation in countries that will find it very difficult. But what it means for me is that we have to, politics has to find a way not only of persuading our own people, but persuading every nation in the globe to take this seriously. And that is hard work. We've seen even in Europe there are countries who can't sign up. And then you see countries like the United States, you see China and so on, all huge, having a huge impact. We have to create a framework where we achieve the drawing in of those countries also into the work that needs to be done to meet those targets.
Absolutely. I think Ireland would obviously have quite a close relationship with a lot of the small island states. For example, the Marshall Islands, who will be underwater if we don't stop at the 1.5 degree target. But currently, Ireland's ambitions for climate action, even if we achieve them all, which we're not currently on a trajectory to do, won't bring us to our contribution to a 1.5 degree world.
Yeah, I met with the Marshall Islands, and indeed we and the Marshall Islands collaborated in one of the sessions in the European Union around the engagement of youth and public mobilisation. We and the Marshall Islands are part of the high ambition countries who want to deliver this. So I think we, with the Marshall Islands, are among those seeking to persuade many of the other countries that they need to adopt these net zero targets. The European Union, of which we're a part, with its net zero target of 2050, is the most ambitious now. There's many who would say we need to be more ambitious in the future, and there's no doubt that is the case. But I suppose the key now is to put in place plans that see us implement the targets we've signed up to, deliver this plan, and each year I'm going to refresh that plan. I'll be consulting with people. If we find that we can be more ambitious, if some things are going really well and we need to put more impetus into them, we will do that. So what I see this is a plan which is based on the best scientific advice I have today, but that will evolve over the next decade. And if we can be more ambitious, we will seek to be so. But we are part of the coalition, both at the UN and in the European Union, which are on the high ambition countries, and we have to work to get those who are now not part of that to join in, or to seek to meet their fears. Like, you can understand a country like Poland with its huge coal history and many communities embedded in the coal sector. I can understand why they see challenges in this, but we have to work with them to do that. And just as we've had cohesion money in the European Union to help very poor countries to catch up, we need to think about cohesion money for countries who are in a very weakened position or who have particular challenges, how they can embrace the change that needs to be made.
Absolutely. And I understand where you're coming from there, but you're talking about Poland and China and the US, and yes, those are all big polluters, but Ireland is not, our house is not in order here. Two of my friends testified for US Congress a month or so ago, and congressmen in the US were saying, well, we can't do anything because China. And I know that that's not what you're saying, because you're saying that Ireland are doing things, but what we're doing is not nearly as much as we could be doing. It's not nearly enough. When you're saying if we can be more ambitious because things are going well, this is an existential threat. This is going to define human progress, human lives right now. It is doing that. My friends are in Los Angeles and Lebanon and their homes are on fire. My friends are in the Marshall Islands and their homes are sinking. And I'm thinking, if we could be more ambitious, then why aren't we? Why is it still framed around money and political will?
Oh, I'm not saying Ireland is doing well. The first thing I said was that we were 95% off target. We set a target for 2020 that would have seen a 20% reduction in our greenhouse gases. The likelihood is that we will only be 1% down on that target. So the very first thing I said was we are way off track. We need to radically change the direction, and that's why I brought in last June a plan to do that. And that plan is radical in my view. I mean, we're going to have 5 times as much renewables, 10 times as much retrofitting, and so on. Those are big changes in people's lives. We're going to take coal out of the grid, we're going to take peat out of the grid, we're going to take non-recyclable plastics out of the supply chain. These are big changes that people will have to make. So if we can do them faster, that would be great. But I recognise that our retrofit industry at the moment is relatively small. We're reaching about 25,000 homes a year, and most of them are not doing deep enough refitting of their homes to actually be near zero climate emitters. We're going to have to have tenfold increase in the scale of that activity, and not all of it can be funded by government. So we're going to have to persuade people that rather than putting in the new kitchen, as I say, they have to look at the fabric of their home. They're both probably similar cost commitments, but we've to change the way people view this, the values, if you like, that people are assuming, to shift that. And I think the younger generation who are articulating the urgency of this are going to be a big part of that persuasion. It won't come naturally to people to say, yeah, I'll put my hand up to spend 30 grand on my home, even with grants. So what we're trying to do is aggregate. So the approach we'll be taking will be very different to what's happened in the past. For retrofitting, for example, we will be aggregating, going on an area basis, trying to get as close to 100% of homes to join in and move that on an area basis, to scale it up, make it easier for people to lock into the project. But that's going to take commitment and get communities who want to be part of it.
Absolutely, and I'm saying absolutely too much. But I think, you're trying to convince people not to put in the new kitchen and to go retrofitting instead to make their homes more carbon efficient and achieve carbon neutrality on an individual level. But Then we're looking at importing fracked gas from America, and we're looking at building an incinerator in Limerick. How do those fit?
Well, the waste cycle, the first thing is the circular economy. We've adopted the principle of the circular economy. And so the key to that is that you avoid first. So we are introducing a ban on single-use plastics. And we will be extending that nationwide. We're going to take all the non-recyclable plastics out of the supply chain, so that will reduce the amount that is going to incineration or disposal in whatever fashion. And we're going to increase, nearly double our rate of recycling, so that we're recovering a lot of that waste that is now going to incineration or to landfill. And that again will take a job of work to make those changes, to implement those changes. But that doesn't mean that as of today we don't have bin lorries who have to go somewhere. We do not want them going to landfill. We've committed to bring landfill from 26% that it is today down to 10%. So we have a strategy in place for our waste to reduce, to avoid, to reduce, but there still will be a residual waste that will have to be dealt with. But we're going to minimise that amount in accord with the principles of the circular economy. And that again is going to take a big change. I mean, I've recently met with the meat sector, and they're going to have to change a lot of the way that they handle their packaging and so on. The same with the retail sector. Big changes are going to have to be implemented in all of these sectors. On the issue of fracked gas, well, I've answered that already. We are not committing to fund an LNG terminal. We will be doing an evaluation. But the best advice that I do have in relation to gas as opposed to fracked gas, that gas, be it coming in on pipelines or coming in as LNG, that gas is the transition fuel that a country like Ireland needs to get to our renewables, because we don't have the level of interconnection. So we need to have a reserve fuel for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And as of now, the most carbon efficient is to have gas as that reserve. In time, we will move to carbon storage and capture. And the Climate Advisory Council has said that technology is something we need to keep under evaluation, because it may provide an alternative to gas. But as of today, we can't lock out of gas.
Okay. But the IPCC report on 1.5 degrees, it does outline this carbon budget of the remaining carbon that we can emit before we hit these tipping points. Gas does not fit in that budget in terms of transitioning away from fossil fuels. Gas, it is a fossil fuel. And in terms of the Limerick incinerator, Limerick has one of the highest rates of asthma in the country. It has also just declared a climate emergency. Three of my friends have worked very hard to get that declaration, and yet this is still happening. I think my generation are finding it harder and harder to trust the establishment here in Ireland when there was the declaration of a climate emergency and then the announcement of a new offshore drilling license or exploration license. There was a declaration of climate emergency in Limerick, and now this incinerator. We're talking about the climate action plan and retrofitting and getting people on the ground to reduce their individual carbon footprints. But then we're talking about importing fracked gas. It's very hard for my generation to trust that our targets will be met and that we will come under 1.5 degrees when all of this is still happening. I'm not quite 17. I'll be 18 next year. I can't vote yet. But myself and my 50,000 friends on the street out there, we will be able to vote in the next 2 or 3 years. And if you guys aren't going to bring in the radical and the ambitious climate plan, the climate action that we need to come under 1.5 degrees, we will elect people who will. It's just about timelines.
Yeah, it is about timelines, and that's what we're seeking to do. Like, I suppose to explain, say you take electricity generation. At the moment we're burning peat, we're burning coal, we're burning a little oil, not much, and we're burning gas, and we have wind. We have 30% wind. 70% is fossil fuels. Now, the journey to get to reverse that, to have 70% renewables, just 30% fossil fuels, that's a journey. It will be a journey that has to be made at a time when we're making our vehicle fleet electric. So the demand for electricity, not only have we to change, but the demand for electricity is going to not far off double. So we've to work out a transition as to how you can double the amount of electricity power because it's cleaner, but also make it predominantly renewable. So there's a hierarchy in the changes you need to make, and you put them into a timeline. The first is moving away from coal, the second moving away from peat, third moving away from oil, and all the time you're moving away from those, you're ramping up. We will have, as I say, 5 times as much renewable. So you're ramping up your onshore wind, your offshore wind, your wave technologies, your solar, you're ramping those up. But in that journey, gas remains the most flexible tool we have available for when the renewables aren't available and we can't get it on an interconnector. If you need a fuel, you need to cut in something that will stop all the lights going out when the renewables go down. Gas is the most flexible, and the scientists have advised us, it's the most flexible and the least damaging option to do that. So that's why we're saying coal goes, peat goes, oil goes, but gas remains as we make this journey. So, like, while I can understand your impatience, if you were to say to me, let's get rid of all the fossil fuels and get rid of them tomorrow, we would have no power, we would not have enough power on our grid to warm homes, to keep factories going. So I have to take a journey, plot the journey that has the, gets to our net zero by 2050 with the least disruption, the least burden, and the most opportunity. And that's what I've done. So it is involve an ordering of things. And while you can say gas remains a fossil fuel, why are we still envisaging it being there? It's because it's a journey that's difficult to take, and that we have to use the technologies that enable the renewables to come on the grid. But you're right, in time, carbon capture and storage, that technology may replace gas. And we may then, be able to say, yeah, we can have a zero carbon electricity grid. That we're not there today. And the same is true of the other sectors. You say waste, in an ideal world, we would have no residual waste. Everything would be recycled. But we are starting from a position where 66% of plastics are non-recyclable today. We're starting from a position where ordinary households, 50% of what should go into the brown bin is going into the other bins and polluting those 2 bins. So, for us to go to that, we've to change systems in manufacturing and also change, the capacity of households to manage recycling in an efficient way. So, that's why it's a journey. It's not, I can't click my fingers and, we're there. I have to put in the incentives, the regulations, the innovations, the structure changes to make all of these journeys work. Someone once said, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose, that you do say you paint the vision, which is absolutely necessary, but then when you start to govern, you have to go through these difficult steps one by one to make it happen. But as I say, I'm going to throw open that plan each year for people like yourself or anyone else to scrutinise it and say, something you could do better here, you should do this rather than that, and we will evaluate any suggestions that are coming in and try to incorporate them if they work.
I'm very glad that's your job and not mine. I'll put it that way. I think that's very difficult stuff, but I guess, our targets are set for 2030, or set for 2050 to be carbon neutral by 2050, when the science is telling us we need to be neutral by 2030. You're talking about painting a vision, and I agree that, to some degree we are talking in idealism, but also it's not idealistic for my generation to want at least as good a future to inherit as the previous generations had. A livable planet is not an idealistic view.
But by no means. I mean, but to deliver that, it requires our action. It also requires international cooperation. And, I suppose people who are trying to be ambitious, we have to bring China and Poland and the US with us. We have to bring the EU. So this is a unique problem. It's not open to the Irish government to fix it. We can't stick up borders around Ireland and say we're going to have a carbon neutral environment and let the others. So we have to work together. If we can be more ambitious, we will. That's my view. If we can do these things quicker, but we've got advice as to how quickly we can ramp up, and many very eminent people are saying your ambition to have no new electric vehicles going on the road by 2030 is too ambitious. The motor industry is saying it's too ambitious, but I'm insisting on it because I think that has to happen, and anyone who wants to be more ambitious about climate, the first thing you do is decarbonize your fleets. That's the lowest hanging fruit. So we have to win the battle against people who are pushing against us, and we need the political momentum. We need the support of people who we're both agreed on the direction of travel, even if you want to go faster than I'm saying I'm able to get there. But we need to mobilize that support behind, like, for example, sticking to a net zero, no new electric vehicles after 2030. That's something that people are pushing back against. You can see it in the papers. People are saying we can't get the retrofitting done. I'm saying we can and we must, and our economy has created new sectors overnight, and this is a sector we've only to create 1% of GDP to deliver on the retrofitting. I think that can be done and it will be done, and we're going to design a model to do it, but there's lots of skeptics saying it won't be done and it can't be done and you're unrealistic to be asking to do it. So I think that's the challenge here, is to create the government leadership, the policy tools that these things happen, and we will need political support for that to happen, be it me being in the seat or whoever succeeds me. Those challenges will still be there, and we will need the broad support of the Irish people to make the journey.
Thank you, Minister. I think, these things, they do need to be done faster than Ireland has outlined the plan to do them in, and I know that that's difficult and that it's unrealistic, but you are the politicians, you are the establishment. It is your job to protect me and to protect my friends. And right now, it's not happening. But thank you very much for talking to me. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks very much. And maybe you'll be the politician of tomorrow.
I hope not.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.